That morning, the London sky wore a somber shade of silver gray, clouds hanging heavy as if plotting an abrupt downpour. Heathrow Airport was packed, streams of people hurrying through gleaming glass corridors that reflected the warm golden light above. Amid the sea of travelers, a tall, broad-shouldered black man moved with quiet confidence. Marcus Bennett, 42, one of Europe's leading tech entrepreneurs, a man whose single phone call could alter the fate of an entire corporation. Today, he had traded his usual navy suit for a crisp white shirt under a light gray blazer, polished enough for a first-class flight to Dubai, understated enough to blend among other elite passengers. Marcus stepped into the first-class cabin of Aurora Air, the prestigious airline with which he had just signed a multi-million-pound partnership to implement an AI-powered customer service system. His seat, 1B by the window, was upholstered in deep brown Italian leather that gleamed under the soft cabin lights. He set down his briefcase, pulled out his tablet, and began skimming reports with eyes both sharp and composed. Everything seemed poised to proceed as expected, until a woman's voice cut in, sweet on the surface but edged like a blade sheathed in velvet. "Sir, this seat isn't for people like you." Clara Whitfield, the cabin's chief flight attendant, stood ramrod straight before him. Her blue eyes did not waver, yet her gaze carried a chill and an unshakable certainty that her words would be obeyed. The statement landed in the quiet space of the cabin, prompting a few nearby passengers to glance up, some feigned focus on their magazines, though their ears were tuned to every syllable. Marcus looked up, meeting Clara's eyes without hesitation. In a calm, deep voice, he asked, "Could you explain that more clearly?" Clara pressed her lips together, her professional smile growing tighter. "This seat is reserved for Mrs. Isabella Cromwell, one of our most distinguished clients, who occupies it on every flight. She specifically requested it today." The way she emphasized distinguished seemed an intentional reminder that, in her view, Marcus was occupying a place that did not belong to him. Marcus placed his tablet on the tray table, reached into his blazer, and withdrew his boarding pass and Aurora Air Diamond membership card, laying them neatly before her. "This is my ticket, seat 1B. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried clearly enough for those nearby to hear. A few glances were exchanged and several phones subtly lifted, ready to record. Clara froze for a beat but quickly regained her rigid composure. Before she could respond, Peter Lawson, the cabin supervisor, approached from the far end. Tall, broad-shouldered, his polished shoes struck the floor in steady, assertive beats. He shot Marcus a glance that made no effort to hide its condescension. "We can arrange a different seat for you. Something more suitable," Peter said, deliberately lowering his tone as if bestowing a favor. Unspoken beneath his words was the raw implication. A seat somewhere less visible, somewhere more appropriate for him. Before Marcus could reply, a figure appeared in the aisle, Mrs. Isabella Cromwell. At 52, she maintained a slim figure in an ivory Chanel dress, a Hermes bag in hand, her eyes gleaming with haughty confidence. "I always sit here," she said evenly, though her voice carried an unmistakable command. "This spot is practically mine. I trust you understand that social standing is not negotiable." The air in the cabin seemed to thicken. Marcus leaned back slightly, fingers interlaced, his gaze locked on Isabella. "I'm not giving up this seat. I bought it. And I am a diamond member of this airline." Each word was delivered slowly, clearly, hammered into the space between them. A heavy silence followed. Peter glanced at Clara, then muttered just low enough for Marcus to hear, "Remove him." Clara's smile vanished, leaving only a mask of cold resolve. Moments later, 2 airport security officers stepped into the cabin, walking straight toward Marcus. A few quiet gasps escaped, and passengers' phones were now recording openly. Marcus rose slowly, picking up his briefcase, his back straight, head held high. "I'll leave," he said evenly, "but remember this. Today, you've just made the biggest mistake of your careers." Clara's lips curled faintly. Peter crossed his arms, and Isabella wore a victorious smile. They believed the matter ended there. But behind Marcus's calm expression, a storm was quietly gathering, a storm that would sweep away not only the three standing before him, but also shake the very foundations of Aurora Air. The sound of footsteps leaving the first-class cabin echoed heavily down the airplane aisle, as if each step left an indelible mark on the floor. Marcus walked between two security staff without a hint of resistance, yet his demeanor silenced the corridor. A few business-class passengers leaned slightly into the aisle, their eyes a mix of curiosity and disbelief. Some raised their phones, lenses tracking his every movement, capturing the moment he left with his back straight and his gaze fixed ahead, never bowing his head. As he stepped through the jet bridge into the terminal, the cold white glow of the fluorescent lights washed over his face, sharpening his features. He stopped beside Gate 12, the boarding gate assigned for his replacement flight. Setting his briefcase down gently, he pulled out his phone and opened the camera. His voice was deep, slow, and clear, without the slightest tremor despite the strangers watching him with curiosity. "My name is Marcus Bennett. My name is Marcus. I was just forced to leave Seat 1B in Aurora Air's first-class cabin despite holding a valid ticket and a diamond membership card. I was told this seat is not meant for someone like me. This is my official record of what just happened." Before he could stop recording, a gentle yet urgent female voice came from behind. "Mr. Bennett, I have something for you." Marcus turned to see a young woman around 29, petite, with brown hair tied neatly at the back. She introduced herself as Leah Porter, a fellow first-class passenger who had recorded the entire incident from the moment Clara approached to demand he leave his seat. "I also caught this," Leah said, her eyes briefly hesitating before she played a video on her phone. On the small screen, the scene was clear. Isabella Cromwell leaning down, slipping a thin envelope into Peter Lawson's hand just before Clara and Peter walked toward Marcus. "At first I thought it was just a regular tip," Leah continued, "but after what happened, I realized I had just witnessed outright bribery." She held out her phone, her voice steady. "I'll send you the original file and keep a copy. If needed, I'm willing to testify." Marcus took her phone, entered her number to save her contact. "Thank you. This is far more important than you realize," he said, and in his eyes flashed something different from his usual calm, the glint of a man who had just found the arrow that could pierce the wall of arrogance Aurora Air had built. Without hesitation, he opened his contacts and called Olivia Grant, the CEO of his company. Olivia's voice came quick and brisk on the other end, but after hearing his brief account, her tone immediately dropped, sharp and focused. "I'll mobilize legal and PR right away. The video is already spreading on social media, Marcus. We have to get ahead of them." He nodded slightly, his gaze fixed through the terminal's massive glass pane where the Aurora Air aircraft still sat motionless. His thoughts raced. He was not only facing three individuals, Clara, Peter, and Isabella, but an entire system that had enabled such behavior. And this time, he had no intention of merely clarifying an incident. He intended to shake its very foundations. Marcus left the gate area and found a quiet corner in the terminal where light from the tall windows slanted through the glass, casting long streaks across the patterned tile floor. He set his briefcase beside him, sat down on a slightly worn brown leather chair, pulled out his phone, and reopened the video Leah had just sent. The glow of the screen reflected in his eyes as each detail of the footage etched itself deeper into his memory. Isabella Cromwell's hand, fingers adorned with gleaming gold rings, slipping a white envelope into Peter Lawson's palm, the unspoken understanding in their eyes, and the way Peter turned his head to signal Clara just seconds later. There was no doubt now. This was not merely unreasonable favoritism. It was a blatant act of bribery carried out in the first-class cabin of an international airline. Marcus stored the video in his personal secure system and sent a copy to Olivia Grant. In less than 2 minutes, Olivia replied, "The evidence is crystal clear. I'm mobilizing legal and PR. We'll hit them on legal grounds, in the media, and with the shareholders. But Marcus, are you certain you want to take this to the highest level?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed fixed on the view through the window, where Aurora Air's Boeing 787 was preparing for the flight he should have been on. A slow burn of anger mixed with determination spread through his chest. "I'm sure," he said firmly, "and this time they won't just apologize and move on." His phone buzzed again, a message from Leah. "I just posted the shortened video online. It's already over 20,000 views in 10 minutes. Marcus gave a slight smile, not out of triumph, but because he knew the roaring current of public opinion had just been unleashed. Once it surged forward, no press release in the world could stop it. He rose to his feet, adjusted his collar, and began walking briskly toward the VIP meeting room Olivia had secured for him to handle the crisis. Each step echoed against the stone floor like a knock on Aurora Air's door, a warning that the time for silence and cover-ups was over. Just hours after Leah posted the video, social media had erupted into a raging whirlpool. The close-up frames of Isabella Cromwell's hand slipping an envelope into Peter Lawson's palm, along with the moment Clara Whitfield stood before Marcus and uttered the words, "not meant for someone like you," spread at a speed that even media experts found staggering. On Twitter, the hashtags #Justice4, Marcus, and #BoycottAuroraAir shot straight to the top of the global trending list in less than 3 hours. Posts from celebrities, business leaders, and equal rights organizations began flooding in, each one sharing the video alongside sharp, unrelenting criticism. In the VIP meeting room at the airport, Marcus and Olivia sat in front of a large screen displaying a real-time online analytics dashboard. The numbers surged by the second: 2 million views, 500,000 shares, hundreds of online articles covering the incident. "We don't need to push this any further," Olivia said, her eyes fixed on the screen. "The domino effect has started, and it's not going to stop." Marcus gave a slight nod, his hands clasped, head tilted forward as if calculating his next moves. Aurora Air stock began to slide during the afternoon trading session. Financial analysts on CNBC and Bloomberg repeatedly mentioned the incident, warning investors about serious risks to brand image and market value. At the same time, social advocacy groups launched boycott campaigns against Aurora Air, compiling lists of more friendly airlines as alternatives. Stills from the video were pulled frame by frame, turned into memes, infographics, and powerful media weapons spreading across every platform. Marcus sat in silence, but inside, he could feel the overwhelming force of public opinion surging toward him like an unstoppable wave. This was no longer the story of one man being insulted on a flight. It had become a public test for Aurora Air in full view of the world, a direct and uncompromising question: what will an international airline do when it is caught committing discrimination and bribery right in its own first-class cabin? 24 hours after the video exploded worldwide, Aurora Air's headquarters in London's Canary Wharf financial district was as tense as a drawn wire. The damp gray sky outside reflected off the tower's glass facade, giving the building the look of being cloaked in a heavy fog. In the grand conference room on the 38th floor, normally reserved for multi-million-pound contract negotiations, the atmosphere now resembled that of a closed courtroom. Marcus Bennett entered, wearing a charcoal gray tailored suit that fit him perfectly, carrying a black leather briefcase. No introductions were necessary. Everyone in the room, from CEO Richard Hale and CFO Bernard Kent to the members of the board, knew exactly who he was, and more importantly, what he had in his possession. Beside Marcus stood Olivia Grant, COO of the tech company he founded, along with 2 senior legal advisors. The air in the room was thick, so silent that the soft rustle of a page turned by an assistant seemed loud. At the head of the table, Richard Hale rose, his usually confident face etched with the marks of a sleepless night. "Marcus, on behalf of Aurora Air, I would like to express our apology." He didn't finish before Marcus, calm but firm, interrupted. "I didn't come here to hear an apology. We will speak about the facts and the solution." His voice was low, not loud, yet every syllable carried a weight that commanded attention. He set the briefcase on the table, opened it, and took out a tablet. With a single tap, the large screen at the front of the room shifted from the Aurora Air logo to the title slide, "Aurora Air, a study in systemic failure. A few people shifted in their seats, realizing this was not a meeting aimed at quiet compromise. Marcus began by playing the bribery video of Isabella Cromwell and Peter Lawson, followed by the shocking moment Clara Whitfield uttered her infamous words. He offered no commentary, letting the footage speak for itself. When the screen went dark, he opened the first slide. Violation number 1. Blatant discrimination in direct violation of current anti-discrimination laws. The next slide appeared. Violation number 2. Accepting bribes and using authority to coerce passengers. Sarah Donovan, Marcus's chief legal officer, folded her hands on the table and added, "These actions, if subject to formal investigation, would not only lead to civil litigation, but could also carry criminal liability." A low ripple of murmurs spread across the table. Marcus continued, "Violation number 3, this is not an isolated incident. Passenger feedback data from the past 6 months shows that black passengers are twice as likely to have their seats changed or be refused service compared to the average. This pattern cannot be explained by coincidence." On the screen, a bar chart appeared, with red dominating the rest, prompting several board members to frown. Richard Hale adjusted his tie, trying to maintain composure. "We are taking the necessary steps to—" Marcus raised a hand to stop him. "Your steps won't be enough. Today's public does not believe statements. They believe actions, actions that are clear, measurable, and accountable." He moved to the final slide. Mandatory action plan. His tone remained steady, but the deliberate pace with which he read each item made everyone feel as if they were being pushed back inch by inch. Immediate termination of Clara Whitfield, Peter Lawson, and the captain of that flight. Permanent ban on Isabella Cromwell from all Aurora Air flights and alliance partners. Public admission of discriminatory conduct and adoption of the anti-bias protocol developed by Marcus's company. Suspension of all operations for 48 hours to retrain the entire system on fairness and service ethics. Formation of an independent passenger equality oversight council with authority to audit and penalize. Bernard Kent, the CFO, went pale. A shutdown like that would cost us tens of millions of pounds. Marcus didn't blink. And how much would a class action lawsuit combined with a 30% drop in your stock price cost you? The question hung in the air unanswered. Olivia added, "The £50 million contract to upgrade Aurora Air's customer service systems is currently on hold, and our group of strategic investors will also be reviewing their portfolios depending on today's response." The room fell into silence. Richard Hale looked around at each face, then back at Marcus. His voice dropped, tinged with resignation. "I propose the board approve Mr. Bennett's conditions." One by one, members nodded, none willing to have their name marked as opposing in the midst of a storm. Marcus closed his tablet and stepped back. "Then start now. Your time is running out." Outside, the London sky remained overcast, but inside that room, a true storm had already begun. The decision to accept Marcus's terms had been made, but not everyone in the room swallowed it easily. After the board meeting concluded, a group of senior executives remained to discuss the immediate execution plan. The atmosphere was still dense, the low hum of the air conditioning blending with the rapid clatter of keyboards from the assistants. Richard Hale sat at the head of the table, his hands clasped tightly as if trying to mask his tension. He looked directly at Marcus, then gave a small nod, an unspoken acknowledgement that control of the situation was no longer his. "We will sign the termination notices this afternoon. Clara Whitfield, Peter Lawson, and the captain of that flight will receive their decisions within the next 2 hours." His voice was deep and dry, as if each word drained a measure of his strength. Marcus did not respond immediately, only glancing at Olivia. She gave a small nod, confirming that their legal and communications teams were ready to release the announcement simultaneously across all channels. It would not simply state the firings, but include clear reasons, cite the violated provisions, and emphasize the commitment to systemic change, the point Marcus considered the most crucial. "Regarding the permanent flight ban for Isabella Cromwell," Bernard Kent interjected, "we'll have to coordinate with the legal department to ensure we don't get sued for infringing on passenger rights." Marcus cut him off, his tone calm but as sharp as a blade. She bribed your staff to violate my rights. That video is irrefutable evidence. If you are more afraid of being sued than of making this right, then the entire story will leak to the international press immediately, not to mention the anti-corruption groups waiting to tear this apart." Silence hung for a long moment. Richard exhaled sharply, then turned to Bernard. "Prepare the paperwork, enforce the ban, no negotiations." Marcus opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick dossier. "This is the anti-bias protocol developed by my company. You will implement it the moment retraining begins. This is not an optional package. It is a prerequisite for reclaiming the $50 million contract Aurora Air has been waiting 6 months for." He slid the dossier across to Richard, his gaze unwavering. Richard flipped through a few pages, his eyes catching charts, customer evaluation procedures, and bias monitoring metrics. He nodded slowly. "We will adopt it in full. But a 48-hour suspension of all operations, Marcus, you understand that will cost us millions?" "You will lose more if you don't," Marcus replied instantly, his voice steady. "This is the one chance you have to prove to the public that Aurora Air is willing to pay the price to change. If you pass on it, the public will conclude your apology is hollow." Bernard Kent stared down at the table, the projected loss figures flashing through his mind. But even he knew that number was still lighter than the damage if the brand continued to be shredded in the media. "I agree," he said quietly but firmly. Marcus rose, fastening the button of his suit jacket. "Good. Then we have no time to waste. I want the press release, the termination notices, the flight ban order, and the retraining schedule announced within 3 hours. Any delay will be seen as hesitation, and the public will smell that weakness instantly." Olivia checked her watch, then signaled her team to begin drafting the announcement. Outside, the city of London remained wrapped in the gray of a damp afternoon. But inside this room, a transfer of power had just been completed. From the hands of an airline once arrogant and untouchable to the hands of a man they had looked down on only yesterday. As Marcus walked out, he knew that what had just happened was only the beginning. The real challenge lay ahead, turning the signed terms into tangible action and transforming Aurora Air from a company forced to change into one that dared to change. 3 days after the decisive meeting, Aurora Air officially entered the largest reform in the company's history. Early that morning, news broadcasts around the world opened with the same image: Aurora Air's Airbus and Boeing aircraft sitting motionless on the runway, not due to bad weather or technical failure, but because of an unprecedented decision: a complete 48-hour suspension of operations to conduct mandatory training on fairness and service ethics. Inside a training center hastily renovated on the outskirts of London, groups of employees, from flight attendants, pilots, and ticket agents to mid-level managers, filed in one after another. Many wore tense expressions, some with arms crossed and eyes full of skepticism, while others looked almost relieved, as if they had been waiting for this day for a long time. On a stage, raised only slightly above the floor, Marcus Bennett stood with Olivia Grant, both dressed simply but radiating the authority of people holding the chance to reshape an entire system. Marcus began, his voice deep but carrying clearly through the enclosed hall. "Today is not about punishing a few individuals. Today is about confronting why a culture of silence, bias, and fear has been allowed to exist within this company. What happened to me could happen to anyone, and in truth, it has happened to many who never had the chance to tell their story." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the rows of seats. "You are no longer required to stay silent, and silence will no longer be rewarded." The training program, titled Equity in Action, was designed by Marcus's own company. It was not a series of dry, theoretical videos, but interactive simulations where employees were placed in the position of passengers who had suffered injustice. One scenario recreated Marcus's own incident in exact detail. From the moment the flight attendant approached, her tone laced with discrimination, to the point where the passenger was told to leave their seat without any legitimate reason. But this time, the person in seat 1B was not Marcus. It was an actress portraying a young mother holding a sleeping baby, and the reactions of the training participants were recorded so they could later see for themselves how they had responded. Many were left speechless. A young flight attendant named Melissa stood up, her voice trembling. "I remember that flight. I was in economy, didn't know what was happening in first class, but I've seen similar situations and I stayed silent. Marcus nodded. And that is exactly why we're here. To make sure that when you see something wrong, you will speak up and you will be protected when you do. Olivia followed, her voice firm. From today, Aurora Air will protect employees when they challenge bias instead of punishing them. Silence will no longer be the safe choice. It will be evidence against you. In the afternoon, the program shifted to the introduction of the Passenger Equality Assurance Protocol, a new control system powered by Marcus's AI. Every customer complaint would be analyzed for patterns of bias, and no supervisor's decision would be approved without review by an independent unit. International media quickly picked up the story, calling it a bold leap and a dangerous precedent. Dangerous for companies accustomed to burying their problems. But Marcus paid no mind to praise or criticism. He scanned the faces in the hall, catching the eyes of a baggage handler named Luis. After the break, Luis approached, his voice quiet but sincere. I don't usually deal with passengers, but I know what it feels like to be looked down on because of my skin color or where I'm from. Thank you for doing this, not just for yourself, but for all of us. Marcus placed a hand on his shoulder and replied, I'm not doing this alone. We all are, if we stop staying silent. The first day ended long after night had fallen. Hundreds of employees lingered instead of rushing out, talking, sharing stories they had never dared to speak before. In Marcus's eyes, this was the first true sign of change, not from documents or rules, but from people beginning to look at one another and say, we will not let this happen again. On the second morning of the training, while most Aurora Air employees were already seated in the auditorium for the next modules, another meeting was taking place on the 15th floor of headquarters, quiet, but no less tense. In a discreet glass-walled conference room, there was only a long table, 4 chairs on each side, and 2 security officers posted at the door. On the table, there was no water or paperwork, only 3 cream-colored envelopes, each bearing a single name. Clara Whitfield entered first. Her chief flight attendant uniform was neatly pressed, but today it looked like nothing more than an empty shell. The sharpness that once lived in her eyes was gone, replaced with averted glances that refused to meet anyone's gaze. Peter Lawson followed, his shoulders still broad but his back slightly hunched, fingers interlocked so tightly the knuckles turned white. The last to arrive was Isabella Cromwell, clutching her familiar Hermes bag like a shield, though her hand trembled slightly as she held it. Senior HR Officer Helen Carter opened the first envelope, her voice clear and uncompromising. Following an internal investigation including video evidence, witness statements, and data analysis provided by the Carter Solution System, the disciplinary board concludes, all 3 of you have committed serious violations of Aurora Air policy, as well as breaches of International Airline Alliance anti-discrimination laws and anti-corruption regulations. She turned to Clara. You abused your authority to target a passenger based on skin color and personal prejudice, and you escalated the situation instead of handling it according to proper procedure. Clara pressed her lips together, eyes brimming with tears, but said nothing in her defense. Next was Peter. You not only failed to protect the rights of the passenger, but you also gave the order to force the passenger from their seat, an action recorded on video and now serving as public evidence of this violation. Peter lowered his head, shoulders sagging, his breath heavy. Finally, Helen looked directly at Isabella. As a customer, you bribed staff to take the seat of another passenger. This behavior is not only illegal, it results in a permanent ban from all Aurora Air flights and those of our partner airlines. In addition, we will forward your file to the authorities. Isabella gripped her bag's handle tightly, her lips pressed into a thin line, and for the first time, a trace of real fear crossed her eyes. Helen closed the folder. Effective immediately, Ms. Whitfield and Mr. Lawson, your contracts are terminated and all employee benefits revoked. Mrs. Cromwell, all your membership privileges are canceled. Security will escort you from the building. Clara was the first to cry. At first the tears fell silently, then broke into stifled sobs. Peter rose slowly, saying nothing. Isabella kept her back straight, but as she walked down the long hallway, her eyes met the stares of employees watching. No one looked away. No one whispered. The silence was not out of sympathy, but a form of judgment. Marcus stood at the far end of the hallway, making sure the three never saw him. He did not seek satisfaction in watching them be led away, but he wanted to witness the moment Aurora Air ended its era of protection and denial. To him, this was not a finale, just a period in the middle of a much longer sentence. The effort to change a deeply rooted culture. As the elevator doors closed, Olivia stepped up beside Marcus and said quietly, "That part is done, but to make sure what we've done today isn't forgotten, we have to engrave it into the company's DNA." Marcus nodded. "And to do that, we need to put new people in positions with a voice, people who will not stay silent when they see injustice." Downstairs in the auditorium, the training continued, but on the 15th floor, Aurora Air had just gone through a necessary act of cleansing, a ritual that signaled to the entire staff that behaviors once overlooked would now carry a price, and that silence would no longer be a safe shield. That afternoon, as weak sunlight filtered through the large glass panels of the 20th floor conference room, Marcus Bennett sat across from the newly restructured leadership of Aurora Air and the representatives of the newly formed Passenger Equality Council. The atmosphere in the room no longer carried the heavy tension of previous meetings, but it was still formal enough for everyone to understand that this was a pivotal moment, not only for the company, but for the way the entire airline industry would approach the issue of fairness. Richard Hale began. "We have reviewed all the provisions you proposed. The remaining question is the mechanism to ensure it doesn't just exist on paper." Marcus leaned forward, opened his black leather briefcase, and pulled out a thick document with a cover reading, "Passenger Equality Assurance Protocol, Mandatory Version." He slid the document toward Richard, his gaze steady. "This will be written into the company charter, regardless of who is in charge. It will be a legal requirement. Any amendment or repeal must be approved by at least 75% of shareholders and the Independent Equality Council. The new council members, including a veteran flight attendant, a representative for ground staff, a legal expert, and a frequent flyer." Each nodded in turn. A young flight attendant, Melissa, who had spoken up during the training, said, "The biggest difference now is that we know when we speak up, leadership will stand with us. Before, that didn't exist." Marcus gave a slight smile, then continued, "I'm not asking for immediate trust. Trust doesn't come from promises, but from repeated actions until they become second nature. We will publish transparent quarterly reports. AI data will track every complaint, every seat change decision, every customer response. The public will see it, and they will judge." Olivia added, "In addition, we will have an open-door program. Any employee or passenger can submit a report about bias directly to this council without going through management. Every case will be reviewed independently, with no possibility of files being buried." Richard sat in thought for a moment, then nodded. "We agree. And I want to formally thank you, Marcus, not just for exposing the problem, but for providing a clear roadmap to solve it." Marcus replied, his voice calm yet resolute. "I'm not doing this for thanks. I'm doing it for those who never get the chance to sit at this table. And because I believe that if one airline can change, the entire industry can." The meeting ended with every member signing the agreement. As Marcus stepped out into the hallway, he paused, looking through the glass down at the runway where Aurora airplanes sat waiting. The image was a stark contrast to the day he had been escorted from Seat 1B now. Each aircraft was not just a means of transport, but a reminder that change is real if someone is willing to pursue it to the very end. 6 months after Marcus Bennett was forced from Seat 1B on that fateful flight, Aurora Air had changed so much that even its staunchest skeptics were forced to acknowledge it. The transformation did not come from flashy marketing campaigns, but from small, consistent actions, gestures, procedures, and responses that slowly shaped a new culture. On a flight from Dubai to New York, a young black woman stepped into the business class cabin, a flicker of unease in her eyes as she glanced at her ticket. The flight attendant greeted her with a warm smile, bowed slightly, and said, "We serve every passenger with the same respect, ma'am. That is not just my promise. It is company policy." The simple sentence made her exhale with relief, a faint smile forming on her lips. She had no idea that to make those words possible, an entire system had been dismantled and rebuilt from the ground up. Marcus, instead of appearing frequently in the press, spent most of his time monitoring data collected by his company's AI system from Aurora Air. The monthly report showed a steady decline in complaints related to bias. Isolated violations were handled quickly and publicly. He understood that perfection was unrealistic, but transparency and accountability were entirely achievable. And it was those two things that ensured the change would not be just a passing trend. One June afternoon, Richard Hale invited Marcus to tour the newly inaugurated training center, a sleek glass and steel facility on the outskirts of London, where every Aurora Air employee, from new flight attendants to senior managers, was required to take mandatory courses on equality and ethics. In the main lobby, a brass plaque hung on the wall, dedicated to those who refuse to stay silent and those who refuse to bow to injustice. Marcus stood before the plaque for a long moment, the light reflecting his silhouette onto its polished surface. Richard approached, his voice low. "You didn't just change an airline, Marcus. You changed the way we think about responsibility." Marcus smiled faintly. "I didn't do it alone. I just refused to be silent. The rest was because of those willing to listen." Outside, a group of young flight attendants gathered at the entrance, preparing for their first orientation. One of them recognized Marcus and whispered to a colleague, "That's him, the man from the story." But to them, Marcus was no longer just a figure from a viral video. He was living proof that standing up, even when it is inconvenient, even when it means facing an entire system, can lead to real change. That afternoon, Marcus boarded a flight to New York. When the flight attendant checked his boarding pass, he was invited to seat 1B. As he sat down, the feel of the smooth leather beneath his hand brought back memories of that moment 6 months earlier. But this time, there were no judgmental stares, no voices laced with prejudice, only a friendly smile and the words, "We wish you a very comfortable flight." Marcus leaned back and looked out the window as the aircraft began to taxi. He knew the journey was far from over. There would still be challenges, resistance, and people who did not want change. But he also knew that if just one person was determined not to give up their seat, it could open the way for thousands more to take theirs. And sometimes, the journey to reclaim justice begins 30,000 feet in the air, with a seat someone once said was not meant for you. From the perspective of someone who has witnessed many organizations face defining moments, I believe true change does not come from flashy slogans, but from the courage to confront flaws that have been allowed to exist for far too long. Real power lies not in swift punishment, but in building a system that leaves injustice no room to return. And sometimes, a single act of resolve, like refusing to give up a seat that seems insignificant, can spark a wave capable of shaking an entire industry. If today's story has touched your belief in fairness and accountability, hit like and subscribe so we can continue exploring stories with the power to inspire and create change. And before you leave the video, leave a comment with the words "No silence," as a reminder that justice only exists when someone dares to speak up.